Let me first welcome our Attorney General for Washington State, Bob Ferguson. Let's give him a round of applause. Hey, thanks.
Thanks, DJ. Yeah, really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
you bet. I'm going to sit here so I can see
Perfect.
our
It's
timer.
a deal. It's a deal.
Tell us first about the state's approach to the Texas lawsuit that has resulted in a federal district court invalidating as unconstitutional the Affordable Care Act.
You bet. So first, thanks, DJ, for having me. Thanks to all of you for having me as well. It's great to see you all. And I think in the video that was shown while we were coming in, it mentioned the lawsuit in Texas, which is significant. One thing to make clear about this lawsuit, so this is a lawsuit brought by Republican attorneys general in federal court in Texas challenging the Affordable Care Act. The state of Washington is in a somewhat unusual position. What we did was we sought to intervene in the case, to join the case, in order to defend the Affordable Care Act, because it was our view that the federal government would not do an adequate job of actually defending that law in court. So we asked the court if we could join. They said yes. So this is not one of those 33 lawsuits in which we've sued the federal government. We're actually in the unusual posture somewhat of defending a federal law because the federal government won't defend it.
So give us the Cliff Notes version of of the federal district court judge's ruling.
Yeah.
Explain the logic of how he found the ACA to be unconstitutional.
Yeah, it's the snapshot is, and it's worth pointing out, even conservative legal commentators have criticized the judge's ruling and have said this will not be upheld in the appellate courts. We'll see about that. But in essence, what this judge said was the individual mandate. Once Congress enacted a law that removed the penalty for that individual mandate, this federal judge said as a result of that, one stool of the Affordable Care Act has been removed and therefore the whole thing falls. Mm-hmm. To put it mildly, we disagree with that. As I said before, even conservative legal commentators have been sharply critical of that decision. So what's happened now is we asked for the judge to stay that decision. So the decision does not go into effect right away, and he agreed to that. So that means for right now, despite his decision, that hasn't changed things with the Affordable Care Act. And it's now up on appeal to the Federal Court of Appeals. So that'll be briefed and argued eventually before the Federal Court of Appeals in the coming months.
I know, as you said, a lot of people have expressed opinions about the legal jurisprudence here.
Yeah.
And some people who I don't always consider, I think of them as very smart, but a lot of folks are saying, well, the Supreme Court has already ruled on this and this is a dead issue. But it would seem to me in my non-legally trained imbecilic mind that the issues in the original ACA decision, the NFIB versus Sebelius case, that those were pretty different. They were sort of step one issues,
right,
different than the issues that are raised in this in the current lawsuit. Do you see the original decision, the NFIB decision, as precedent for this case, or are these really separate decisions that will need to be made?
Yeah, it is a separate lawsuit. And do we think that original Supreme Court decision, the 5-4 decision, which Justice Roberts helped uphold the Affordable Care Act, will be helpful in this case? Absolutely. I also think importantly that the Supreme Court sent a signal with that decision, right, with that 5-4 decision, that a majority of the court wanted to uphold the Affordable Care Act. We'll see. The court has changed, right? We'll see. But I take nothing for granted in any of this litigation. We first need to go to the Court of Appeals first, where a 3-judge panel hears it. So it could be some time before it gets all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the Court of Appeals plays a very critical role in laying these issues out and presenting them for the Supreme Court. But I'd be shocked if this was a case that did not end up before the United States Supreme Court eventually.
Yeah. Tell us, you've been, I don't know if you want to call it an activist attorney general. There have been a number of Democratic attorneys general who have become more active under this presidency. How would you describe, this is a political philosophy question, the sort of state of our dual sovereignty federal system of checks and balances? In other words, the states are very active trying to check this president. Under the Obama administration, Republican states were very active trying to check that president. Does that make this sort of dual sovereignty where the federal and the state governments are both sovereign, does that actually create long-term tension that could become problematic? Or is this a demonstration of really the healthy checks and balances that are built into the American system of government?
It's a good question. A couple thoughts. Number one, look, I think it's fair to say I view myself as an activist attorney general. I think that's a good thing. I think my job is to represent the state, right? State legislature, like Representative Cody and J.T. Wilcox are here, right? And also represent the people, right? An interesting commentary on that issue of the checks and balances came from Charles Krathheimer, the late Charles Krathheimer. He's a conservative political commentator, wrote lots of articles, and he wrote a really interesting article before he passed away about Democratic AGs litigating against the Trump administration, to which he said, hey, he didn't necessarily agree with all the lawsuits that are being filed, but in his view, we have a system of checks and balances in our democracy. It was his view that Congress, then the Republican Congress, had abdicated its role of being a check on the president, and therefore in our democracy, someone needs to fill that void. In order for us to have a healthy democracy, you must have those checks and balances, and his view was, hey folks, you may or may not like it, but the Democratic AGs are filling an important democratic function on challenging the president and being a check on the president. It's also worth noting, Republican AGs challenged the Obama administration dozens of times, and that was really the first time you saw a dramatic increase in litigation against the president in a coordinated way. They lost far more of their lawsuits than they won. I'm proud of the fact that for Washington State, we've won 16 cases and lost none so far against Trump administration. So I'm proud of that record and being a check against the administration.
So, what do you want to do after you're Attorney General? Ever given that any thought?
It's a trick question. Look, I love being Attorney General. We have a great governor who's talking about running for president. I support that if he wants to do it. He's also keeping open the option of running for a third term. So, once Governor Inslee makes a decision about what he wants to do, whether it's a third term or whatever that might be, I'll make decisions at the right time. But, my wife and I have 10-year-old twins. I've got a full-time, very busy job. I can assure you that every minute of my day is focused on either my work or my kids. That's pretty much my life right now.
Yeah, good. Yeah. So, you don't come, that I know of, to the Attorney General office as a health policy expert. Previously on the King County Council, but you've been very active on healthcare legal issues, and you and your staff. So I'm wondering, what have you learned in your last 6 or so years as Attorney General about healthcare in general that you might share? Not so much about your underpinning sort of healthcare philosophy, but specifically from the legal work that your office has done. What have you learned about healthcare?
It's another good question. I guess a couple of thoughts. First, I'm glad you mentioned my staff. Jeff Sprung, one of my attorneys in my office, I think he was on a previous panel and one of the breakout sessions, is working on that Affordable Care Act case and many others related to healthcare. So the team does, I get to talk about those cases. They're the ones working around the clock and on the weekends to make those cases happen. You're right, I didn't have a healthcare background coming into the King County Council or into public service. In my time as Attorney General, what I would say is I've become pretty immersed in issues related to healthcare from a legal perspective. And what I think I would say is that, I think I obviously felt this going into public service, but now I feel it far more acutely, is the massive implications for people, the people of our state, access to healthcare, right? Who does, who doesn't have it, and how critical that is for the people of our state and the people of our country, and how, as Attorney General, I can use litigation as one tool, right? Our state legislators have other tools. I have a particular tool. The governor has other tools. But I think as Attorney General, I have a particularly effective tool, especially right now, to bring to the fore in the courts as a check on the administration and to enforce the rights of the people of my state in a way that I think is especially powerful. Look, Congress is dysfunctional. Turn on the news, no surprise, right? Newsflash. But attorneys general can get immediate, quick, dramatic relief for the people of their respective states by using the courts in an appropriate way. And federal judges don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. They don't care what you're tweeting. All they care about is the law, right? And how that impacts the people who are in front of them. And I think that's why we've been so successful.
So given your perspective on healthcare, last question. What would you say is the biggest thing we will see in 5 years in healthcare or health policy? Again, from your specific perch.
Always tricky to say the most, right? The biggest, right? I could list off 5 or 6 right now. But I would say one that I've given a lot of thought to and frankly always have, mental health issues. Our state is really grappling with those issues. Issues of mental health are especially challenging because I think there is still a stigma around issues related to mental health. I got very interested in those issues on the King County Council. I have a late uncle of mine who served in World War II, survived the sinking of the Quincy, the worst naval defeat in U.S. history, was overnight in the waters, which just really terrible situation. Returned home, had a family, got married, successful life, living by all appearances the American dream. And when he should have been enjoying his golden years, he went to a park and he shot himself. Didn't leave a note. It was a complete shock to the family. And that was a big wake-up call for me. I was relatively young there, but the impact on our family was huge. And so I've always had interest in mental health issues as a result, and you see the challenges we have at Western State. As a state, all the challenges that come with that, that issue's not going away. Yeah. I think it's only growing and will be one we're all grappling with for a long time.
Attorney General Bob Ferguson.
Hey, thanks, DJ. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.